Hi everyone, I'm Cory Anotado, the executive producer of Tell Us About Yourself, conversations with game show contestants. Our first season has come to a close, and our host Christian Carrion is taking a well-deserved break. He'll be back in the new year with new episodes of the podcast. Meanwhile, I'll be replaying some of our favorite episodes, giving you a chance to listen again to some of the greatest stories we have from the stars of your favorite game shows, the contestants. We couldn't do this without your help, so we appreciate you listening and supporting the podcast. We also could not have done this without the support of the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong National Museum of Play. The National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong preserves the history of game shows, from the earliest panel shows and quiz scandals, to the games and puzzles of the 1970s, to the Big Money Network series, and the classic games now in prime time. You can learn more about the archives or the museum itself at their website, museumofplay.org. We would also appreciate if you visited our Patreon page. You can support the podcast for as little as $1 per month. You can check that out and more at patreon.com/packdude. Now, without further ado, here's an encore episode of Tell Us About Yourself, conversations with game show contestants.
Tell us about yourself, would you?
Tell us something about you.
For any new viewers, won't you tell us again about yourself?
We've met before, but let's meet again. Tell us about
What
yourself.
else can you tell us about yourself?
Perhaps you'd fill us in again and tell us about yourself.
I'm Christian Carrion. When I was a teenager, I was a tape trader. I had a network of friends across the country with whom I'd exchange VHS dubbed copies of rare game show episodes, occasionally of dubious video quality, but always fascinating and entertaining. That's how I first learned of Maggie Browne. She had been a contestant on several shows, some of them pilot episodes not even intended for broadcast. Nevertheless, Maggie had a flair for making the games she played look so exciting, so engaging. She's since been married and gone on to a legendary career in metalwork, during which she's made props for hundreds of clients, from Sylvester Stallone to Michael Jackson to Dr. Spock. However, she remembers her game show years fondly, which I was delighted to learn as we talked via phone from her home in California. Maggie, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself.
My name's Maggie. Originally, I'm from Newark, New York. Lived in California most of my later life. And let's see, I up till last year owned a metal shop where I make metal props for movies and TV. I made the Rocky Buckle, made the tiaras for the Princess Diaries, lots of cool stuff. For 50 years, I did that. Now, I got involved in game shows somewhere in the early mid-70s, and did them probably till the latest 80s, I think. And let's see, what else was the other thing you wanted to know?
I think that's it. Where you're from, what you do, and how many shows you've been on.
You know, the shows I did so many pilots, which are really like when you're doing one, it's the exact same thing as being on the show, except in those days you got $100 instead of, fabulous prizes. And so sometimes they're so perfectly produced that once in a while you go, now, was that a pilot or was that a real show? And weirdly enough, my sister heard my voice. She once in a while watches the Game Show Network, And a couple of months ago, she heard my voice and ran into the living room because she sometimes keeps that on for background noise.
Sure.
And I was on a show called Phew, it was, but it wasn't a station that I got or something like that. But she did most of it. And believe it or not, even though I won a considerable amount of money, I had completely forgotten about Phew. And it was a Tom Kennedy show. It was, and just going from what I was wearing, it looked like it was probably a late 70s show.
Yeah, 1979, I think, is when that was recorded. That particular one that you did. Yep.
Yeah. And so it's amazing, but yeah, probably about 6, I would say, that I actually went on.
I actually have 8 on my list, but we'll talk about them one by one. And I know we're sure, and I know we're working off of old memories, so I understand if you don't remember all of it because this stuff is a long time ago. But I need to tell you, Maggie, how I became familiar with you. I have been a fan of this type of TV my entire life, and one of my hobbies when I was a young teenager, when I was maybe 14 through 17, I used to collect VHS tapes of all these old shows, and as I met people who were into this hobby as well, they had things that I had never seen before, and they had a lot of these pilots, and I still, to this day, don't know how a lot of them got out there, because pilots are usually meant for, just the executives at the network to see, to decide if they want to buy the show.
Yeah, mostly my feeling was they were meant to get sponsors. And so the network already was like all in because, man, they were on the big stages with the lights and the moving platforms and the, real audience and, so it was like, they just wanted to, this is how it's going to look. Now give us some money, now advertise on our show.
Sure. Yeah, because in a lot of cases, the sets were already built and they already invested the money into the show itself and hiring the talent and all that. Yeah.
It was the real MC, was going to do it.
Right, and that's how I became familiar with you. I started seeing you on these weird pilot tapes that I would get from all of my friends. Yeah, and I was fascinated by that type of TV, and as I got older, I started to become more interested in the stuff that doesn't air and the things that people aren't typically meant to see. And your name came up on a lot of these pilots, and it is a testament, I think, to your talent as a contestant. I mean, there has to be a reason why you've done more than one of these shows, right? What is it about you, do you think, that makes you, or that made you back in those days, a great pilot contestant?
Well, I'll tell you what they told me at some point, because you play enough of these things and you gotta go back to where in those days there was no cable, so it was just the network TV, just TV stations, broadcast. And so a contestant was only allowed, the networks had interlocking agreements, and a contestant was only allowed to be in something like 3 games in a 5-year period or 5 games in a 3-year period or something like that. Once you've done that, you were then locked until the first one fell off. And so at that point, contestant coordinators who knew you from one of the ones you'd been on would call you to help them develop shows in the office. And so the producers and the contestant coordinators would get to know you and know what you could answer and what your special skills were, as it were. And for me, I really think, aside from the fact that I retain useless information, was that every game seems real. I played with contestants who, when they were doing a game in the office, those little dinger buzzers that hotels used to have, and stick-on labels, and just some PA being the MC. It's like a real game. And so, and some people would be very ho-hum, even on pilots. Well, I'll just get my $50 or my $100 a go. For me, it was like, I was playing for $100,000.
Sure, and you can tell from seeing your performance on these as well. You sell it And I think that that's probably something that a lot of these producers look for. Right.
It was just the way it was. It's hard to describe the stress of being one if you don't know what they're like. I mean, you see it, one sees it as like an audience, and it looks like fun, but man, it's killer up there, and especially the BuzzerBlog.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Those games where your skills are put to the test, and you've done a lot of them. So I think what I'll do. Before we get into the list of shows and maybe talk about each one, I'd love to know, because I usually start every conversation on this show, Maggie, with how did game shows fit into your life before you became a contestant? A lot of the people that I've talked to, they grew up watching them. I grew up watching them, and I gathered a lot of, for better or worse, a lot of life skills from the people that I watched on TV. How did that type of television fit into your life before you fit into that type of television?
Not a lot, really. I mean, I guess Jeopardy was on that early. But, I didn't watch daytime TV much because in my shop I couldn't. I bought my shop in 1971, and then when I was growing up, that would be in the early 50s. The games that were on were stuff like Beat the Clock, and and You Bet Your Life and things like that. But, my mom used to, there's all the different games different people can do, and some cannot do them. I could not play wheel or anything with anagrams, like bottle and stuff. I'm not a good Scrabble player, even though I'm an excellent speller. That's just not my thing. Different contestants are different things they're good at, and that's not mine. And so, but my mom used to walk through the room, look at the wheel board on the TV, and say what it was, with a few letters up. But I don't know, it was just seemed to hit at the right time that some customer at my business, we were talking about, I don't know what, and I said something about Peter the Great or something. And he said, you know a lot of stuff. Why don't you just go on game shows? And we were really struggling in the early days. And I thought, well, I guess I could do that. And I called up Joker, and that was my first one.
That's right, the Joker's Wild, and that was, if you bought the Metal Shop in 1971, that was only a couple years after. I think I have 1973 as the year that you were on the Joker's Wild, and that was for CBS, and that was, for anybody who doesn't remember, because it hasn't been on in a long time, that was the game with the giant slot machine. You'd pull the lever, and you'd get your categories, and you'd answer questions depending on what categories came up, and it required a lot of quick thinking because you only had a few seconds for each question on that show. That's a tough show.
It was. And let me tell you, in those days, there were written tests. You had to go in and take a written test. And the test was incredibly hard. I kept asking contestant coordinators. The one I knew I got wrong was, what did Flubba Dub eat? First of all, I'd be old enough to remember the Howdy Doody show where Flubba Dub was, which I was, but I sure couldn't remember what he ate. Finally, somebody told me spaghetti or something. But that's when I started realizing how brains work, because one of the questions was, what was the name of Henry Hudson's ship? And I just wrote the Half Moon. And that's when I started evolving my memory as a cork in the water. And if you try to remember it, you can't. But if you just mellow out your brain and zone out, if you ever heard it, it might pop out. But with Joker, the thing is, it was a luck show.
Right.
Not a brain show. And I answered every question right, I think. But all I ever got was $50 polls. So I lost. I got Lee press-on nails and, lovely parting gifts and stuff like that. And I think I got $25. I went to Mars bars. Anyway.
Sure.
Because I remember trying to give out the Mars bars when I was soliciting votes for a candidate down on the oceanfront walk in Venice. And I was told that you weren't supposed to give anything away to get someone's vote.
Unless it's candy.
But I didn't pay for these Mars bars.
Sure.
Anyways, yeah, but it was Jack Barry, who I did some other shows for later on. And so, once they called me to come and work on another game, just like, you want to come and play a game in the office, I'll give you $25.
Right. And it's funny, it's funny you mention that, Maggie, because I think a lot of people who watch game shows don't realize the network that you build getting on a game show. If you're really good at it, it's a job like anything else. They'll see you and they'll say, hey, you're really good at this. Would you like to come to this place and do this job? And, when I describe my experiences on game shows to people, they're usually amazed that I was able to get on more than one. Usually one game show is, a lifetime achievement for somebody. And they're amazed that, it even gets to the point where they'll call you and they'll ask you to come and, play a game. And it's a really interesting time to work for Jack Barry, because this Joker's Wild was really his big comeback after the scandals of the 50s. He kind of spent the 60s in the background, working in Canada, working a little bit in the United States, and he had really come back with the Joker's Wild, and all of a sudden, all these formats are coming out of this company, and there's the Joker's Wild, and there's Blank Check, which I think you were a contestant on, and there's all kinds of other shows, yeah, and yeah, I would love to hear about your experience working with Jack Barry, especially that transition from becoming a contestant on the Joker's Wild to being invited to play Blank Check.
Yeah, Blank Check was my first car that I ever won. But yeah.
Wonderful.
Anyways, okay, is it okay if I say things?
Oh, you could say whatever you want.
Okay, Jack Barry was a fascinating guy, because he really was one of those fast-talking New York kind of guys. And, and he also always called me, he either used to call me Molly Brown, I think. He would just, Maggie Brown didn't, he couldn't get that. And, but times I did pilots for him. He would actually say to me, look, you're really good at this, and I want the game to look competitive. So if you get the first two right, will you miss the third one? And in my mind, that was like saying you haven't developed your game enough. There should always be, I got really spoiled way later on to work for the Carruthers people, but you'll get to those people later. But it's this honing of the game that I didn't appreciate at the time. The work that goes into making a game where it will always the person with the lowest score going into the final round has a comeback possibility. And he didn't structure the games that way. It was like he was rushing them to pilot before they were really thought out, because obviously you can't say that to a contestant, or it's breaking all the rules that he got in trouble for in the 50s.
Sure.
So, his games were fun. I think I might have done a pilot that was kind of a Name That Toony one, or that the contestants actually had to sing the song.
I think I might know which one you're talking about. There was one called Countdown that he did in the mid-'70s that was a kind of a song guessing game, but there was some element of dice to it as well. There was some kind of thing like that. But yeah, that was a main kind of core concept was like guessing song titles.
Yeah. And I'm pretty good at those. Wouldn't be now because I dropped out of popular music sometime in the 80s, but then I knew everything, also. And way back, at least, I could sing all of the old songs because my parents sang them,
Sure.
Anyways, yeah, Jack Barry was an interesting guy. But he would do things like, I thought Well, having a metal shop was pretty cool for a girl, when you have to say what you are. But he wanted me to do one, and I think this was a pilot, like a celebrity show. And it was like one of those something at night kind of shows. It was all kind of people on sofas and everything. And there was comedians and stuff. And I was supposed to, he said, tell them you're a policeman. And I said, whoa, dude,
Yeah.
I'm not a policeman. That's okay. Just tell them you're a policeman. That way they can tell jokes. And so in that way, it was uncomfortable. Blank Check was great, though. That was a good show. A real interesting concept that the same contestants would be on, the same whatever there were of us, 8, 9, I don't remember. Contestants would be on for a week.
Right, and you all kind of competed. Right, you competed throughout the week, and whoever had the most money at the end of the week would come back or win a car. Yeah, it was interesting. One of the things that I've noticed about a lot of the shows Jack Barry's company produced in the 70s was that they tended to borrow elements of more popular shows and put their own spin on it. So in the mid-70s, there was a show called Jackpot on NBC that had the same sort of core concept. You had 16 players competing throughout the week. And looking at Blank Check in the context of what was popular in the mid-70s, it seemed like they were trying to capitalize on that idea that, you could have a cast of contestants that came back day after day.
The idea was that the audience would become involved with with one or the other of the different contestants, and that would foster viewer involvement,
Right.
Of a Monday show, you'd want to see how the guy you like did on Friday,
Sure. It probably saves them a lot of money in terms of casting as well. I mean, it's only 5 people you have to pick for each tape day.
Except what they had to do? They had to sequester us. Because that was a definite show where you could collude.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, and that's right. We should explain, quickly the concept of Blank Check. You're writing a check, and you have a selection of numbers in front of you, and the people across from you, your competitors throughout the week, are trying to guess what number you're going to put in your check. So it becomes this game of, do I be greedy and pick all the highest numbers for the end, or do I, you kind of have to figure out when to say when in terms of the check that you write for yourself, because you win the amount of the check if you get to complete it.
Right. And so it was possible for contestants to collude. So they did the thing a game show usually does that's going to have a returning champion, where you bring your clothes for 5 days, But in this case, they put us up in a hotel, and you weren't allowed to make any phone calls. You weren't allowed, if you missed if you didn't have any hairspray or something, if you forgot something,
right,
you were just screwed. You were just in this room. So we shot 3 days, and then went to this hotel where we all walked down from, it must have been a Universal or somewhere where we shot it, because we walked down to the Beverly Garland Hotel where they put us up, and the contestant coordinators had to monitor us and all this kind of stuff, and have breakfast and not talk to each other. It was like juries, and then they took us to the studio again, walked back up the street to the studio, and did the last 2 days. But yeah, it was a strange experience.
Now, speaking on the point about being sequestered, because again, something that a lot of viewers might not realize is just how much security is involved in keeping the contestants away from the people who might know the answers, or the people who can affect the outcome of the game if they were crooked. I wonder, because you've had so much experience working with other producers, was there a difference in the way Jack Barry's production sequestered his contestants? Were they more careful because of their history, because they were attempting to come back on the up and up? Was there any difference that you may have picked up on?
I don't think so, because normally it's there's almost no chance to screw around, because, you win a game, and then you're the returning champion, And so that means they stop the show, they stop the show, and then lights go up, and they take you backstage, and you're never alone. You change your clothes. They come and try to fix your hair. They do whatever they do, and it's literally 15, 20 minutes. And you're back out there for the second day. I'm amazed at people on Jeopardy who last as long as they do, just because eventually you just wear out physically. For me, the stress of it is immense, on Blank Check, I realized that also involved a buzzer. So you could have a chance to answer a question, so you could write your check.
Right.
That if I at one point focused on the MC's necktie watching this life and missed the question. And so I realized you have to have your brain in this whole other place where you're just completely in a zone. And that was the most difficult thing, when they want you to be sparkling and amusing and say something clever at the beginning of the show. And, with the Carruthers people, they got so used to it. They'd say, she's just getting ready. Don't mess with her.
Sure.
When you need her, but, so I got like 30 seconds where I can do baffle gab, amusing talk about my shop or something, That was another problem, because a lot of my shop anecdotes dealt with making things for movie stars, and I can't talk about that. So,
right.
It's like that was another problem, of course. Anyhow, yeah. So on to the next one.
Yeah, well, I also want to talk for a second, because we're talking about the producers that you've worked with, Maggie, but you have worked with some of the greatest hosts the game shows have ever seen. So We've already talked about Jack Barry, who, in addition to being a talented producer, was a great host, especially for The Joker's Wild. I think he was at his best at The Joker's Wild. Blank Check, you worked with, and you're one of the few people I have the pleasure of talking to who's worked with one of my favorite hosts. His name is Art James.
Oh, he was lovely, yes.
What a wonderful host he was. Yeah, he was just coming off of the Who, What, or Where game, which was a sort of companion to Jeopardy that was on NBC for a few years. And he never really had a show that was as popular as that, and even that is pretty obscure today. But I always thought he was a very talented host, very, very warm and very charming.
I was lucky because I obviously brought your luck with Peter Tamarkin. Who is lovely, and just a wonderful, wonderful guy, really smart.
Yeah.
And that Few show with Tom Kennedy.
Right. Oh, you worked with incredible, incredible hosts. Yeah, Tom Kennedy, Peter Tamarkin, even Monty Hall, which we're going to talk about in a second. But yeah, you really worked with some of the best.
The guy that it was on very short. It was called. I actually did it with my husband. They wanted two people. It was a couple, but it wasn't one of those newlywed game things. And it was called Headline Chasers. It was only on like for a month.
Oh, yeah, with Wink Martindale. Yep.
Yeah, with Wink Martindale, and he was very nice. It's a good when they're gracious.
Oh, absolutely. And that puts you at ease as a contestant. It's really interesting to hear you talk about your experiences as a contestant, Maggie, because it reminds me of somebody who's really proud of their job, and they look at it as a job. And I can imagine that having a talented, smooth host that makes you comfortable makes it easier for you to do your job as an engaging contestant.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've watched some shows and thought, I don't know how comfortable, how good I'd be with that guy. But, I suppose Trebek is the king of that,
Oh, sure. Sure, absolutely.
But I loved Peter Tamarkin. I thought he was super, just great, a great boss.
I'm jumping out of place here for a second, but Peter Tamarkin I think is my favorite game show host of all time, and he was the one that I first started watching regularly in reruns of Press Your Luck. That was the first show I ever really started watching, as a habit. And I was in love with the guy. I thought he was fantastic, and I agree, left us far too soon. Very tragic.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. So to jump ahead from Blank Check, so now we're in 1976, and we're doing a pilot for Monty Hall Productions, Stephen Hado's Monty Hall Productions, and it's something called Talking Pictures. And I don't know what recollection you have of it, but it was I can imagine you must have some stories, because I just want to quickly talk about the celebrity lineup we had on this particular show. So we have Artie Johnson from Laugh-In, Kay Stevens, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Lyle Waggoner, J.P. Morgan, Soupy Sales. Monty Hall is standing to your immediate left. That has to be such a surreal experience to be around all these celebrities.
But this was a pilot, right?
This was a pilot. Yeah, this never went to series. He tried it in the 60s with a little bit of a different format, but this one in the 70s was much more entertaining than the original. And he had all these celebrities, and they told stories, and they hid behind doors, and you had to guess where they were hiding.
Oh, God, this is coming back to me. I mean, some of the pilots, literally, they would just call you and say, come, do this, look this way, And that was a pretty frenetic one. I remember one with Monty Hall that was like a high-low game, like card sharps, but not. And, but this one has faded from my brain. Damn, you are so lucky to have the pilots. Wow.
Oh, I'll have to share them with you, Maggie. I think you would really enjoy seeing them. I think this one for a long time, I don't know how it got out, but it was in the UCLA Film Archive for a long time.
That's hysterical.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, it's surreal to be able to talk to you, because I've only seen you in these pilot films and some of the other game shows that you've done. So it's really fascinating to hear the story behind some of these. But yeah, Talking Pictures, you had all these celebrities in Monty Hall, and it seemed like a lot of fun. And again, this seemed to be somewhat an attempt to capitalize on the success of Match Game, which was a huge show back in the mid-70s.
Yes, and another type of game that I'm not so good at. It's like not so good at the anagram games,
Sure. Yeah, and this was a memory game with a little bit of anagram thrown in. There was some kind of bonus word that had missing letters you had to kind of fill in. So this was both of your core weaknesses in one show.
Get my core weaknesses there. That's what I like. Yeah. I mean, I hated losing even in a pilot.
Oh, sure. Well, that's what they're asking for, is that competitive spirit, and it comes through on camera. That's one of the most important things a game show contestant can be, is competitive.
I'll tell you a short story. I had a guy call me once from a tabloid, and he wanted to. It became obvious after talking to him for 5 minutes that he wanted me to tell bad things that happened at game shows. And, giving answers or whatever, And I said to him, I'm a woman who owns a business, and game shows have done so much for me, because they've taught me that it's all right to be competitive, that, in fact, I might get a car.
Sure.
And if nothing else, rice aroni and some Lee Price on nails, but at least the competition is rewarded. So for a girl in the 70s, that's a good thing. It's just past the days where we couldn't even get, our own savings accounts or checking accounts or whatever, So...
Yeah, very empowering. And I imagine, and you will have more insight on this, Maggie, than I will, but I can imagine that as a woman in the mid-70s, the ability to use your knowledge, to use your intellect, to use your competitive spirit to further your life, to win money, to win a car, must have felt very empowering. I mean, looking back on it, it is an empowering sort of image, that idea that you can be smart and triumph and win.
It totally was. I mean, I owe a lot other than some money and some cars to game shows. I mean, that whole experience of meeting grown-ups who appreciated me for my brain, because after Joker, I made sure I was going on games that, as much as I could find, or more knowledge than luck. Well, luck's always a component, otherwise it wouldn't be a game.
Sure.
But because you got to have an equalizer.
Oh, of course.
And so there's some luck in there. But, basically, that all these people, I mean, with one company, with Carruthers, they'd be inventing a game in their office and I'd be working in the shop. And the phone would ring and he'd say, "Hey, it's Bill. What's the second highest mountain?" And then something like that. And I'd tell him, and he'd say, "See, I told you she'd know that." And so, in a sense, he would use us, his bunch of contestants, to structure the contestants they would be looking for. They would say, "Okay, this is a Maggie and Jack level question. This is a so-and-so level question, so we don't want to pair people who fail that question with people who fail this question. If we want it evenly matched game."
Sure.
That kind of care in terms of picking potential contestants was awesome.
Yeah, that's an attention to detail that you don't hear a lot about in terms of game show production. You mentioned an interesting name. You mentioned Jack. Is that Jack Campion by any chance?
Yeah, sure, Jack Campion.
He's another one of these contestants that's done so many pilots. I don't know if he's ever been on a show that's actually aired, but I've seen.
Sure, I know he has, and I think I only did pilots with him and played in the office all the time with him, because we were just about equal.
Right, yeah, he was a very good game player, and he was another one that was very good on camera and knew how to sell the role of contestant, on these pilots. I've tried to track him down for a long time because I've always wanted to talk to him about his experiences, and I have had no success in that.
I thought he was a lawyer or something.
Yeah, well, he was, and for a while he was coming up as a lawyer, and then he must have retired recently, but I just have not been able to track him down. I would love to talk to him.
It'd be great to see him again. He was a great guy, really pleasant. Just easygoing, very nice guy. And I was always like, "Okay, this is a good match. This will be a fun game,"
Right, when he was in town, for sure.
And they would never put us on an actual show together because we knew each other's stuff so well.
Right.
That would be not fair. There was another guy, short, kind of blonde guy, so smart. We all just called him Encyclopedia Man. And his name was Guy something, and he was like the head of a private school in Pasadena for a while, I know, and I can't think of his last name, but he was great.
Well, speaking...
there were some great contestants that we used to play with.
Yeah, this era of television...
There were some jerks, too.
Oh, were there really? Well, I could imagine. I guess like any other part of the world, right? There are jerks and there are good guys.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there was one guy, he was on a lot of stuff I was on, or in an office with playing the game or something, and he just hated it when I beat him. And it was a I can't have a woman be smarter at that kind of stupid thing.
Right.
And it's not only smarter, it's just that they ask the questions that I happen to know the answer to, or I'm a little faster, and that's all.
Sure.
It's not a matter of that kind of competition. And somebody like Jack always understood that, but this guy just totally didn't.
Well, speaking of a little faster, we're moving now to the end of 1976. This is November of 76, and you tape a pilot, your first of several, for the Carruthers Company. And this is a show called Second Chance, and this is for ABC.
Oh, yeah. That was wonderful.
Yeah, and this show is unlike just about anything that's been on TV up to this.
It was a great show.
Yeah, it was a fantastic show, and I think that they perfected, they perfected the idea years later with Press Your Luck. But I thought that that's way ahead of its time, very fascinating to watch, very exciting. Second Chance is really the precursor to Press Your Luck, almost like the prototype, and it had a lot of the same sort of hallmarks. It had the huge board with the spinning light. You had devils instead of whammies, before they thought of that as its own standalone character. And you were a contestant on at least one of the pilot episodes of Second Chance.
Yes, I was. Here is the best story about that. First of all, the Dynamite game. I had started playing it literally in the office, when they were just figuring it out and straightening it out, making sure their question writers were writing the answers right, writing the questions right, all that stuff. All from that, the ones where they're trying out MCs, to the ones where they're, I did every step of the way up through and including the pilot. So they couldn't put me on the show because all of us that had done all that, they just couldn't get you on, because now the studios had rules that a contestant that had done what I'd done, you had to wait 6 months. So that an audience member could memorize and internalize the strategy of the game as well as you already know it. When to pass, when to stop, all those little subtleties of the game. And at that point, I was pretty tight with the Carruthers people. And they said, well, we know you can't go on, but don't you have a sister? And I said, yes. She's smarter than I am. And they said, well, why doesn't she come in? And we'll, put her on. And so I said to Mary, look, you want it, this is like, you could do this. And Mary said to me, I'm sorry, I freeze under pressure and I don't retain useless information. And I said, it's virtually a gimme that you'll get on. And if you get on it. So Mary doesn't learn the way I learned. She made flashcards. It was one of those things with what's the third longest river and what's the, we all know what's the third. And so she memorized the top 3 of everything. I mean, this is insane. She made flashcards. And for movies, books, and, the most translated out of English author, the most, all these things. And here was the wonderful moment. Your sort of significant other was allowed in the green room before the game started, and then they shoo you away. And so I walked with Mary in there, and that nasty contestant I mentioned was sitting in the room. And he looked at me and he said, she's not going to be on this show, is she? And I said, no, I'm not, but I'd like you to meet my sister.
How wonderful.
And she won. And the game was called Second Chance. And Mary won a flight for 2 to Italy and took me with her. And on that flight, I met my husband.
How wonderful is that? Wow.
And he won his trip on CrossFit.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What a twist of fate. So you meet somebody who you end up married to who's I guess as into game shows as you are.
Well, not really. I mean, he was just like, we do it for, I mean, a lot of guys in those days, or at least some my sister knew and some I knew, would get gigs on the dating game. And they'd never get chosen, but they were funny. So they would have them back every year or so, or, and so Robert did that, and he did CrossFit, and then, like I said, we did 1 or 2 together, later on.
Right. Wow, what a wonderful story that is. I love that.
But,
I love that.
There's your bizarre little game show story, yeah.
And now, again, this is your first time working with the Carruthers Company, and they like you. How many of these pilots for Second Chance did you do? Did you just do the one? The one I saw was marked as number 3 or 4.
I don't know how many they did because I probably went in all of them. They probably shoot 2 or 3 or 4, I don't know. And then they use the best ones for selling
Right.
But, I tend when I get upset to mess with my hair and sort of random my clothes. And I remember at one point in our commercial break, one of the hair ladies, the makeup and hair ladies, started coming at me with a call. And he said, "Don't touch her. Don't touch her."
She's ours.
We like her to look like that.
Right. That's wonderful. It's really interesting, Maggie, that the Carruthers people saw so much in you, down to your image, and they just didn't want to alter that in any way because they knew that you would work.
Yeah, I'm not as sort of homogeneous as some of them, I never looked like whatever the fashion thing was then, really, and there were a lot of very sort of lacquered, pretty blonde girls and stuff. Contestants. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, not at all. But you had a definite, unique look about you. It's funny. My wife uses a phrase when it comes to the type of person that she likes, and there's somebody who can have a good time and laugh at themselves and laugh at the person that they're with and kind of have a beer with them. And she refers to them as rough and tumble. You had a very rough and tumble sort of look about you that was engaging, and it just looked like you could have a good time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, yes. Certainly on the game shows. So, they gave me my hub. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, they sure did. And now we're going to move on from Second Chance because this wouldn't be the first time you'd work with the Carruthers people. They would come to you years later. But in the meantime, there's a show that I have trouble saying into my microphone because it distorts, but I'll try it anyway. The show is called Phew. It's the most onomatopoetic name for a game show I've ever heard. But this is a frenetic show. And
I'm
this,
telling you,
yeah.
That's the one that my sister saw and videotaped. And I'm like, I think I won something like $15,000 on that show, which in those days was serious dollars.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I don't remember a thing about it. It must have been, and like, it's not like, I remember all the other ones like it was yesterday. That must have been just so frenetic, because you can see you just running from one place to another place, answering these questions really fast. And
right. And it's not even answering questions, right? Because you get a statement with a word that's underlined, and they try to make the word sound funny, and you have to correct that word.
The wrong word, and you have to insert the right word.
Right. And it's very, very fast. It's almost like, the format is almost like Jeopardy if it was football. You're kind of running across the board trying to answer questions from one side to the other players trying to block you. And I think the one that you did, it was actually one of the pilot episodes. One of the game show channels, they used to do an annual event where they would show things that they'd never shown before. And one of the events was that they were showing the pilot episode of the show because they had just started running the actual series. And I think that's how your tape came about, because they just decided to air it one year.
Maybe that was a pilot and not the show, because I'm going back what year it was, and I'm thinking, I don't remember getting $15,000 that year, so maybe it was a pilot.
Right. Well, I have my research in front of me here. Let me tell you right now when that was taped. So we are in December 4th, 1978. Is the date that we have on this. So December 4th, 78, and I think it premiered in 79. So there was a little bit of a gap between the pilot and when it went to series.
Okay. That's like right before I got married.
Right. Yeah. And so this was, it looks like this was actually the third pilot episode for the show, and you were a contestant, and yeah, very exciting show. And again, you get to work with a legendary host, and this time it's a man named Tom Kennedy, who is already massively famous in the world of game shows by the time this job comes about.
And a great host, because he had to, like the Jeopardy host, he had to read that question as fast as he needed to, clearly enough so that you could answer it. There couldn't be any question about what he was saying.
Right. He had to be very clear, yes, because that it's so important that, to get that cue to give the right word. And sometimes they write them to be funny, and you have to read those without laughing or read them with a straight face. And I can imagine that could be a challenge sometimes as well.
Right. No, he did a beautiful job. He did a total pro, and really nice.
Right.
Very nice.
And now this show was produced by somebody named Burt Sugarman, who worked with a guy named Bud Austin, and they were the producers of this show. And again, like Second Chance, very unique show. I can imagine that it might be difficult to sort of farm your past for experience that might lend itself well to this, other than the fact that it's just a really fast and exciting game.
Yeah, I liked it. I thought it was great. I don't know why it didn't catch on big. Probably because it was difficult. I mean, except for just from hanging around in those production companies for a while, what I got was what they really want is if they used to say this all the time, is that like if it's on and someone walks into the room, they get involved in it right away. And they're just like, so they certainly this one would I think would have passed that test.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Somebody having to go from station to station to station, and then they read another thing, and then you run to here, and they read another thing. I mean, that just the visual of a contestant running across the stage all the time, answering questions, has got to be,
Right. Well, I also think something that the show had working against it was that there were a lot of rules. The core concept was there in terms of filling in the blank, and but there were a lot of rules. I think there was a question on Family Feud around this time that was something like, name your favorite game show, name the game show you watch most on TV. And Family Feud was number one, of course, but somewhere in there was Feud. And I think Richard Dawson made a joke that the rules took the entire episode to explain.
Well, yeah, it was tricky about the blocking.
Right, and but I could choose
whether to play the game or block.
Right, and what's funny? The show hadn't been on in reruns for a long time, but now that it is, there are people on the internet who are tabulating the advantage that the charger has over the blocker, and whether it's more beneficial to always block and not have to put yourself through the ringer answering the questions, or whether it's worth it to do that and win the money. Or it's really, really interesting the way they tabulate the statistics of it. But I thought it was a very interesting strategy for a game. Again, it kind of introduces, excuse me, it kind of introduces the football type strategy into it, because you need to, set your block so that you want to, almost psychoanalyze the person that you're playing and see, how greedy they'll be or where they'll go.
Yeah, my feeling was with it that blocking is playing defense. And if you know that you can probably answer most of the questions, then you got to go for, playing all the way through. You just got to try it. Otherwise you win by sort of, I don't know, just blocking. That didn't seem very exciting to me.
Sure. And I think you have a chance at more money if you're the charger, because you're picking the value of each question rather than just, setting the blocks and hoping that they land on them and you win that money. Really, there's a lot of strategy to that game, and I would say among people like me who are huge fans of this type of TV, is one of the most underrated shows I think there's ever been.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, they probably could have simplified the rules somewhat, and, but what really does happen, I don't know that production company, so I assume I got that gig because a contestant coordinator from Carruthers was working for that company right then. And they have their list of good contestants that they carry with them and keep to their bosom, so that they look good when they bring contestants in to do pilots.
Sure.
So, like, if Beth or one of the contestant coordinators from Carruthers had gone over there for a while, she might have called me to do that, because I don't remember the Sugar and, I don't have any personal contacts with them, really.
Right, and I think that was the only show you did for them. It may have been one of the few shows that they themselves did at all, but... Yeah. A few years later, now we're back with the Carruthers Company, and they approach you to appear on the pilot episode of a reformulation of Second Chance, 7 years after the fact, called Press Your Luck. And I wonder what you could tell me about that experience.
That was hysterical. Not only was I on it, and I think I won 2 games, and I was on 3 or whatever it is, but then at the first season wrap, they asked me at my shop if I'd make a whole lot of little whammies that they could make little trophies and give to people for wrap gifts. And that was wonderful. I still have a whammy.
And, how wonderful is that?
Yeah, it was all the time. My partner did a beautiful sculpture, a little whammy, because we used to watch it all the time. And at that point, we had the TV in the shop, so we could watch it. But
sure. I was trying to pause you for 1 second, Maggie.
In my wheelhouse, that show, in terms of question level and that kind of stuff. And but of course, it had the luck component with the whammies, and that was, you could just get wiped out doing that, still answer everything right.
Sure. I want to pause for just a second because you mentioned that trophy. A big component of this National Archives of Game Show History is this collection of props. If you were ever interested in donating one of those whammy trophies, I guarantee it would have a good home.
Okay, I'll think about that because I retired last year, so it's in storage with a lot of my shop stuff, and eventually we'll move up to Portland, and I hope to have a smaller scale shop where I could just make stuff I like to make. And when I pack all that, he's labeled the box he was in because he was in my display case in the office.
Sure. How wonderful. And now this is your first opportunity to work with, again, a host that we talked about a little while ago, but my favorite of all time, Peter Tomarken. And This is your first experience working with Peter. I can imagine that this was an exciting set to be on, not only because of the presence of Peter, but because of the game itself.
Yeah, the game was great. And I had done some of the playing it in the office. I don't think I did the pilot. But I've done some of the playing in the office, so I know.
Of Press Your Luck, so you actually did do the pilot of Press Your Luck. You were there.
I was.
Okay. You were. You and Jack Campion were both on the pilot.
Okay, that's great. I knew Second Sound, but I wasn't sure about this one. Yeah, it was great. It was a great game. Everyone was really classy. The whole crew, the whole set thing. And they would, because of my work, you have to fill out all these forms saying you don't know anybody at CBS or whatever it is. Of course, I know a lot of people at CBS, but they're prop men and wardrobe people. Customers, basically.
Sure.
And, but they said, whatever you do, don't put yes. Just put no. You don't know anybody here. Don't look up when we're bringing you inside. Don't look up. Don't sort of wave at anybody.
Right.
But yeah, it was a great show. Peter was great. I think that's the one where they tried to make my hair flat. And Bill Carruthers said, no, don't mess with her hair.
Right. The image is the image for a reason.
But yes, that was a wonderful show.
Now, you mentioned a little while ago that there were some pilots for which you couldn't appear on the series because you had done such a good job on the pilot that there was just...
Well, we're too close. It wasn't that I'd done a good job.
Okay.
That it would not give a normal audience member would have a disadvantage to me because I knew all the strategy of the game.
Got it. So I wonder in that context how it came to be that you actually appeared on Press Your Luck when it became a series and you were a champion on Press Your Luck.
Yeah, I was. I don't know. Magic.
I guess so. They just did you a favor, I guess.
I guess it's before they started getting really strict with it, because Second Chance was after that.
Yeah, so Second Chance was 76. We're in 1983 now for Press Your Luck. So there's a few year gap there.
Oh yeah. So maybe things had lightened up a little or something. Yeah, 83. Wow. Already had my kid by then.
I mean, I guess it's not outside of the realm of possibility that they just liked you and wanted to put you on the show.
No, it's not outside the realm of possibility.
Sure.
Once in a while, I still go to the bank or something, and somebody obviously watches the Game Show Network. Say, did I just see you in Press Your Luck? And I mean, that's a lot of years ago, and I have completely white hair, but it was fun. Those were fun days.
Oh, they were fun to watch, and I can imagine it never gets old being recognized from these shows.
Oh, it's always surprising, but it's fun. I guess the last Carruthers one I did, was
Wipeout, yeah, and that I was watching the credits of Wipeout, and Peter Tomarken was actually he was credited as a writer, and I think he was a producer as well.
Yeah. And, it was like the old gang back again.
Absolutely.
They pretty much just called Billy Mitchell, who was one of their heads. He was a wonderful guy. Lighters, just call me a Philip. I don't know how long this could be on, but this is a great show for you.
Yeah, and it was a great show for you, too, because this is very general knowledge based. And what I love about Wipeout, about the format of it, is that you don't have to be a genius to be good at Wipeout. It kind of puts everybody on an even playing field. So you get a question or a category, and they give you 16...
Well, what you had is a screen with like 12 answers on it.
Right, 12 or 16 answers, and you just pick the right one from the wrong one.
Ability to write. And so if you happen to know them, then your question is, do you answer some of the really easy ones, or the ones you think everybody would know, and then pass? Or do you just run the board, which is kind of no fun?
Right.
I had one of the categories, I was lucky. One of the categories I had was who's on first. It was all the players on the Abbott Costello baseball game. Who's on first.
Right, the famous sketch, sure.
Yeah. And I memorized that once for a method acting class to see if you could play something like that with just really serious emotion. The great frustration that these people are feeling. I'm asking a question and you're not answering me. And so I knew all those answers, But the worst part of that game, well, first of all, funny, was that they did still make women wear skirts and heels to play the game. I had a section in my closet, which I call my nice lady clothes, that were only for game shows. And because I have fabulous formal gear, but mostly I wear pants to work, and pants that I bought at thrift shops most of the time.
Sure, sure.
I'm just going to get burns and stains on them and everything. So I had my nice little pleated skirt and a nice little blazer and a blouse and like short heels. And where I was standing was right between where my podium was, or, whatever little buzzer desk, was right between where two set pieces came together. And so when I run, you're supposed to run down and jump up and down and shake Peter, or whoever the MC was, hand. And my heel got caught. And so I thought, well, I have to go down there. So I just stepped out of my shoe and tried to keep from looking like I didn't have a shoe on. And ran down and did my little dance at the bottom. And luckily, if they noticed, they didn't shoot my feet.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. That's an amazing ability to kind of think on your feet. That's a great way to no pun intended, tap dance your way out of that situation.
Well, you have to. You have to stand there. You got to go down there. They're going to look at you like you're crazy, and the camera's all set up. And then in the commercial break, they had tennis shoes you put on. And that was very hard because, okay, all I had done, I have one of those big book of lists game show. Every game show person has them.
Sure. And
this is a perfect game for those because they are all, every question has like 16 answers, so you need, and so I had looked at Nobel Prizes and I thought, they're not going to have physics, chemistry, and, nobody knows any of those. And so all I did was like look at the Peace Prize winners and look at the literature winners. That was all I did. Didn't even sit and try to memorize them. I just sort of, brain photo. And the bonus round was Nobel Prize winners for literature. And what you have, this is so frustrating to play. They show you all those names, however many there were, fewer for the bonus round, obviously. And then you press the buttons for like 5 answers or something. And then you ran across the stage and pushed a great big buzzer. And then it would tell you how many of those answers were wrong, but not which one.
Right. And then you have to go back and correct it and hope that you're correcting the right ones. Yeah.
And a lot of people just would erase them all. Well, that didn't tell you a single thing. If you erase them all and they only told you that 3 of them were wrong, well, then you have no, it was, and I think I changed the last one to Samuel Beckett, like in the last second.
Right. It is a very challenging bonus game because it's not only mentally demanding, but it's physically demanding.
Yeah, and you don't realize when you're watching on TV that when you're standing there in front of it, it's a big board, so you're kind of looking up at it,
Right.
It's not like you're looking right at it and it's containable in size like on your TV screen. You're looking up at it in the air, and so you have to move your head to see them all. You can't contain the whole thing in one field of business. So, you go through the first half and just eliminate the ones you know aren't right. And then the other ones that are guesses you put. And luckily I changed somebody to Samuel Beckett at the last minute, I think. Last second.
It was such a great show to be on. And again, it's just something that speaks to your strength as somebody who has sought the most intellectually demanding shows for yourself. I mean, it doesn't, it's hard to do better than Wipeout. It's just such a mentally demanding show, and he did such a wonderful job.
Well, if you're trying to find a show that limits the luck quotient, of which I have learned, then what's left are the really tough shows. And I see, this is all the stuff that, and nothing bad ever went on. I will tell you this, and this is for the archive. And I would go to parties at the Carruthers' house, and Billy Mitchell's house, and, all the guys that worked on those shows. And other game show people were there, And one woman came up to me and said, why aren't you trying out for Jeopardy? And this is a while ago when our women weren't on very often.
Sure.
And I said, I really don't have any interest in going on a show where I'm just going to be cannon fodder. And she said, I think you could do it. You could do it, you could play it, And I just never did, And then when I started thinking about it after I turned 60 or something, I thought, well, I could see about the seniors tournament. And then it was all online. And it was pushing buttons, on a keyboard and stuff. And I'm like, nah, I'm not going to mess with it.
Right. Well, yeah, I think it seems like you're more of a fan of the in-person sort of old school approach to this kind of thing.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Pretty cool.
Wonderful.
And even those later ones like headline chasers and stuff, that was still just a call that came to my shop, literally. And they said, could you come tomorrow and just play the game? You don't have to take a test. Can you and your husband just come and play the game? I'm sure. I said, no, yeah, no.
Right, of course, right? Because they're fun. And headline chasers actually very much more anagram based and letter based than.
See, Robert was to figure out the letters, and I'd tell him what the headline was.
Oh, got it. Okay, right. So you had the knowledge, and he had the
really
letter ability. Right.
Because you were allowed to confer, And so yeah, we were great teammates on that one.
How did you do on Headline Chasers? That's actually not one that I've seen the show, but I haven't seen your episode. Did you win?
Yeah.
Did you win? What did you win?
I don't remember it.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Robert, do you remember what we won on Headline Chasers? So like, he's going.
Sure, that's okay. No, I completely understand if you don't remember. But you won. I mean, that's the important part.
Yeah, I'm certain we won because remember we did a bonus
Right.
round.
Wonderful. What an experience. And again, to work with Wing Martindale is probably a treat as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And one of those guys who could roll out of bed in the morning and do it.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Oh, he was born with it. Some people are born with that talent. Absolutely.
Him and Tom Kennedy were like,
Yeah, they were incredible hosts. Maggie, one of the things I'm fascinated with speaking to you is just how much you remember about these experiences. I mean, they have to have been memorable, but have you ever spoken with anyone else at length about these experiences before?
No. I mean, obviously my sister and I reminisce once in a while about Second Chance. But no, I mean, once in a great while, I get somebody who recognizes me. And, if you Google me, like there's a whole lot of Star Trek stuff, because I made all the stuff for the Star Trek film.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of Sherlock Holmes stuff, because I'm a Baker Street regular. And then there's game shows. So people who look you up, especially if they realize I used to be Maggie Browne, because a lot of them were before Robert and I got married.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating to I mean, this is an era of game shows that I have a particular fascination with, because it's the reruns of this stuff that I grew up watching. So it really, this stuff fed my curiosity and kind of in a lot of ways made me who I am. So I have a certain level of fascination with, shows of this type. So I love the stories, and I love that it was as much fun making it as it was to watch it. To hear you tell these stories, it just sounds like you had the time of your life.
I did. I used to say to people, if I keep doing this, being on these shows, if I die, it's going to be on one of these shows, because you have to be it. Right, for me, such a weird level of just, doing this. And I realized when I started playing buzzer games in Carruthers' office that when I was doing the buzzers on the table, it's lifting my arm up and slamming it down. And then I was wasting a millisecond lifting my arm up and then smashing it down on the buzzer and permanently wounding my palm. And so I would just sit and practice at home, watching Jeopardy, just having my hand 2 inches above the buzzer, putting it down, 2 inches above the buzzer, putting it down. So I wouldn't be all this wasting all this time raising it up in the air before I put it down. Stuff like that. That's really well, you said you were on some. I mean, you know how it is.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I was on, I'll give you the quick list. The Price is Right, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Match Game, Hollywood Squares, something called The Chase, and then a show called Let's Ask America. But The Price is Right, Millionaire, those were like dreams. I'd grown up watching those shows, so to get there was like was a dream come true. Even to be in the same room that all these other shows that I knew, were taped in. I talked with another person who was on The Price is Right, and they agreed that you can feel the spirit of all these broadcasters in that building. We're at Studio 33 at Television City, right on Fairfax, and it's just, that is, it's history, it's television history being in there.
Yeah, and just the amazingness of the way they wheel those sets out, and the way you're on that pressure, like the whole contestant seating area swivels, and it's
right.
It's really just grand when it happens.
It is. It's larger than life, isn't it? It's like it's like a fantasy world.
But then it all cones in. If it's one of these knowledge games, it just cones in, and you're all, focused. You just don't see anything anymore. You're just. I mean, once it gets to hitting buttons for whammies and stopping things, that's a different deal. But when you're answering those questions, you just got to be. And I never wanted to go on like a family feud thing. I didn't see this once about, and I think it was a pilot, or at least a fairly far along one, about that was the same kind of format as Family Feud. Like, how many people would agree with, one of the questions was, who would you rather, what does the survey say? Or would you rather have a beer with Jimmy Carter or Joe Namath? And it's like, well, I would rather have a beer with Jimmy Carter. But I don't know who you interviewed to get the other answer.
Right. There's not much knowledge of all. You're just guessing at that point.
How do I mean, you do have to guess the level of intelligence of the people they ask the questions to. I mean, having a beer with any president would seem to me to be wildly preferable than to have a beer with some athlete. And I don't even like beer. Scotch or wine, yeah.
Right, sure. Maggie, if you have to take a drink of water, please do that. And
Okay, I've got some right here.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Yeah, I almost have everything I need, but I'm so fascinated with all these stories. Maggie, I feel privileged to have had this conversation with you and have you relay all these experiences to me about your time in game shows. And, again, this is something that we're preparing for the National Archives of Game Show History, and these recordings will be kept for posterity in their archives, and people will be able to listen and hear the stories of all these contestants who appeared on game shows all throughout the decades, you now included in that. I wonder if you could coalesce some thoughts on how you feel about this type of television getting its recognition in the form of an archive, a museum, something that people can go and experience. You know, in my opinion, it's a long time coming, and I wonder if you feel the same way.
I definitely do. I think that that era of the TV game shows, the daytime TV game shows, was a wonderful time because there were games for everybody. I personally never could look at the newlyweds and things like that, the neighbors. Oh boy, did we hear about that show.
Oh boy.
But, you know, everyone worked so hard on them to try to come up with something that would be challenging, not just a good game, but involving for the audience to watch it. That's, to me, the most important part. What's going to involve watching the producers try to evolve something that's going to grab the audience and make them say, no, don't change the channel. I want to watch this. Let's see what happens with this. So, you know, I feel really, you know, pleased and honored that I could be in it on so many levels of figuring out the games in the office and playing them in their raw states. Well, they said, no, see, it didn't work. It's Maggie just won in the first round. We have to change it. We have, you know, is that we can't do? We don't want a runaway game. That was what I always heard. It can't be a runaway game. Gotta structure the game, not dumb it down or do something or not. They weren't saying, let's not get smart contestants. They were saying, let's structure the game so that, you know, anybody's got a shot up till the last round. And I just thought, that's great. And then also make it exciting to watch. And Whammies. You know, you can have really smart people on a show and the Whammy's going to get you.
That's right.
You know, we did have a TV in the office and the shop. And so for a while when the game shows were on, we used to watch a lot of game shows. And then the talk shows started creeping on. And I mean, I think when we first had the shop, all we watched on TV was reruns of The Rifleman and the Broderick Crawford's Highway Patrol, you know, things like that they used to just show on the day. Old TV shows had been on, you know, in the 50s.
Right.
And then the game shows came on, and there were a lot of good ones, you know.
Yeah, no, there sure were. There were so many.
Started having Sally Jesse Raphael and, you know, the talk shows, and we just went, oh, click.
Yeah.
Go back to listening to classical music.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're much better off.
Yeah, really. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you know, we tune in for Donahue once in a while and something, but, you know, yeah, this is, you know, I'm 78 now. So, you know, it's been a while since we did game shows. I think it's probably, there ought to be a time, everything's cyclical. There should be a time when the game shows come back. I mean, somehow Jeopardy and Wheel have lasted all this time. Password's still on.
Password just came back. A lot of shows, Maggie, are coming back. Password just came back recently. You know, there's a new Press Your Luck on ABC that's on weekly, and they're really doing an incredible job with that show.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's nothing compared to the original, and I will always watch the original any day over the new version, but for what it is, I think they're doing a wonderful job with it. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, worth it, definitely. Yeah, I would never go on a celebrity game, because in that case, I had a friend who went on Password, and he's brilliant, he could answer them all, but the celebrity he was on with was making too many jokes.
Yep.
You know, and if you're stuck with that, then you lose. You know, and that was, I think, mostly a prize show. I tried to pick the shows where I would get cash.
Well,
And then I found out you could turn down the prizes. I mean, I didn't need to my son. Watch this. My 42-year-old son will watch some old show I was on. He'll say, Mom, where's the pool table? You turned down the pool table. We lived in an apartment, Andrew. I had no use for a pool or one of those water ski things, those ski-doos or something.
Right.
This is not what I need. A lot of times I take the airplane flights because what I found out is it worked the same way as cars. I just contact the airline and just make the flight go to somewhere else. It's like money. So the flight was worth this to go to Florida, but if I want to go to New York, I can just kick in a few more dollars and go to New York. And so that's what I would do with plane flights. But, and most of the cars, I would just, that's like a gift certificate at a car dealership. So you go in there and you win a Beretta, and so, but I got, an SUV. And just, the dealership's perfectly happy with you putting in some more money and getting a better one.
Well, sure.
What the first car I won was a Chevy, and that was the one that was the Beretta. And then I traded up to a Vega, which would tell you how bad the first car was.
Right.
But the old Vega lasted a long time.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. Maggie, this has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for remembering all of this, and thank you for sharing it with me and for allowing me to have this conversation with you. I'm blown away, and it's really just an absolute pleasure.
Well, for me too. So, and I'm, one of the reasons I've done this a couple of times for oral history of like what I did in the shop for 50 years, and things like that for other archive things. And so it's nice to know for me that my good remembrances of a time will be somewhere for somebody to someday listen to and think, boy, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Sure. And it was a lot of fun talking about it. I'm personally enthused that it was as much fun being on the shows as it was watching them. So I cannot thank you enough, Maggie. Thank you.
If you ever get a hold of Jack Campion, tell him I say hi.
Tell Us About Yourself, Conversations with Game Show Contestants, is hosted, edited, and produced by me, Christian Carrion, from my studio in beautiful downtown Lancaster City, Pennsylvania. Co-executive producer, Cory Anotado. This has been a production of BuzzerBlog, the most popular game show website in the world, in partnership with the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. For more information, visit museumofplay.org. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Christian Carrion. Good night. This program is brought to you in partnership with the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. Co-founded by veteran television producers Howard Blumenthal and Bob Bowden, the archive preserves the history of game shows. Scripts, set designs, props, and other materials spanning over 80 years of broadcasting, as well as interviews with legendary game show hosts, crew members, producers, and more. From the earliest panel shows and quiz scandals, to the games and puzzles of the 1970s, to the Big Money Network series and the classic games now in primetime. For more information about the National Archives of Game Show History, visit museumofplay.org.